And I'm just going to go over a couple of agreements and technology things, and then I'm going to take my screen off and allow Dr. Thomas to put her screen on. But a couple of agreements just as reminders that, I know it's really tough for some of you. It's very early in the morning or late at night. Just try really hard to stay engaged, and remember that it's important to notice each other's discomforts and stay curious and just recognize the growth. Remember when we were together last time, we talked about the importance of just, speaking your truth, and it's okay to share your thoughts and opinions, that they're important and they matter, and we want to make sure your voice is heard, how critical that is. Expect that, there may not be closure to everything, because it's a process where we move together. We've talked about that before. And then, the listen to learn. So those are the agreements we had been using the last couple of times that we had been together. So just a reminder. And then a couple of technology reminders. So Karen, this is your question. On the right-hand corner, it gives you view options. I suggest that while Dr. Thomas is speaking, that all of us turn our view to speaker view, because that way you would see her in the window and then you would see the presentation. But if you'd rather see people, so Dr. Rogers, like if you want to see everybody, there's a little grid there. And if you'll click on the grid, then you will see most of the people in the group, and you can kind of keep clicking that group, and it'll move it around a bit. If you want to see yourself, there's a way that you can, it says see self, and you can just click that box. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, those are some really good little tricks for helping to move it out. A couple other little tricks before we get going. Please mute your microphone. And you will notice that when people have their mics on, especially those of you who are in rooms with several people, we can hear what's going on. And if I don't see you muting, just so you know, I will mute you. So as we get rolling, when you have a question, you may want to look at your mute button and make sure that you're unmuted before you start speaking. And Dr. Thomas can tell you how she wants to handle questions as soon as she takes over. But I just want to let you know that I may mute you just because there's so many of us on the call. Sometimes it's easier for the rest of us to hear if everybody is muted. We encourage you to keep your cameras on. However, if you experience a weak internet, the very first thing you should try is to close your camera. So leave audio on and leave visual on so you can see the screen, but you may want to actually close your camera. That will strengthen your internet connection. And a lot of times that will help people. I've learned with the international schools, sometimes that's a real strength. So consider that as well. There is a chat feature, and I have enabled it, which means that you are able to chat at any time. So what that means is that you can put comments in there. You can ask questions. You can, give a yay, things are going well, we can't hear you, or we hear you loud and clear, or whatever you want to say in the chat. And I'll be monitoring the chat as well. And can share things with Dr. Thomas as we go if she doesn't catch it. Sometimes when you're the one speaking, it's harder to follow the chat in Zoom. And then you can also send private messages to a participant. So if you're seeing somebody that you enjoyed, when we were together in somewhere else that you want to just send them a little private message, you're more than welcome to do that. You're also welcome to private message me, remember Belinda Carge, if you're having any troubles at all, or if you need to leave early or anything like that. I'm kind of monitoring our technology. I also have another computer going that I'm monitoring emails if you have trouble. And I also am monitoring our Google Sheet, which is the sign-in sheet for tonight. So want to make sure that you see that as well. So I'm going to get ready to change over my screen, but I just wanted to remind you that Dr. Thomas is our speaker tonight, or our facilitator really, tonight. And I just want to remind you that Dr. Thomas comes to us with a rich background from the University of Oregon, where she spends some of her time when she's not traveling around the world, working in the Department of Special Ed there in Clinical Sciences, and she's affiliated with the Center for Teaching and Learning. And her primary research interests are working with English learners. So she has a lot of amazing experience to share with us this evening. So I am going to stop sharing to allow her to begin sharing, and we'll switch roles here.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all again. I'm guessing I met some of you about a year and a half ago in Warsaw. It's been a while. I'm glad to see you guys again, and I'm glad you're part of our program. I know it's been sort of a long time and sort of an interrupted process, considering where we wanted to start. So I'm going to start with just this view so I can see most of you, and just ask a couple of questions. So when I ask a question, if you can raise your actual hand or raise your hand on the screen. So the first question is a reminder for me mostly about your role. And so if you are a classroom teacher, raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. If you're a special ed teacher, raise your hand. Okay. If you are an administrator, raise your hand. Okay, anything else? And another role, maybe like a speech path or something like that. All right, a couple of people. Good. So now I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about who the students are that you have in your classroom and that you serve.
We also have a reading specialist who put a note in the chat.
Oh, okay. There you go. Thank you. So how many of you serve children with a learning disability or some other kind of disability? Okay. How many of you serve children who are learning English as an additional language? Okay. How many of you serve children that are having learning difficulties but don't have an identified disability? Okay, so almost everybody, right? So, so a couple of others, a language teacher, a STEM specialist. Okay, good. So, I mean, so the same sort of variety of people that we had last year. So, what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to give you a couple of brief overviews. So as you recall, when we saw you guys in Warsaw and then in Sofia, last year, the purpose of our program was to build your background, right? Your background knowledge about issues related to special education. This year's program is going to be more of a practical application. So we're really going to talk more about processes and procedures. So since this is the beginning of the year and, you know, a lot has happened since last spring, we thought it would be good to connect with you guys and kind of get you thinking about the things that we are going to be talking to you when we see you, hopefully, this March at the conference and then later for the follow-up meeting. So one of the things, so this is really more of a preview of some of the content that Susan Grant and I are going to share with you guys. And so it's the preview of the principles of assessment and becoming a better observer of behavior, right? And so what we really want to do, what we're going to do tonight is to just start thinking about how can you start thinking about children's needs and what they, and what you can do about it, right? So we started with the introductions, and I did them that first so I could see you guys all together before I put up the screen. I'm going to do a brief overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about types of knowledge. We're going to talk about areas of assessment and observation. I think that observation is extra, and then procedures that you might use to get you thinking about how you can become a better observer of children behavior. And Karen, if you want to jump in at any point with any issues related to gifted and talented children, please go ahead. But these are pretty universal kinds of issues, right? So we already did the introductions. So how about an overview? So why assess? So one of, that's the big reason. Why do we assess? And, when we're talking about assessment, the main thing is we want to know about children, right? You guys are used to assessments that probably have to do with, sorry, I'm going to change my view so I can see a few more of you, because it's just kind of weird talking to myself in the screen, even though I had to teach on Zoom last spring. So it was weird again to have to do this. So why do we assess? And again, it's to get information on children, but we want it to be systematic, right? And so I would say that this year in particular, for many of you, it's even more important to know where students are, right? Because now it's not just sort of the regular loss that we sometimes get in summer or from kids moving from one school to another, but they also have that loss of schooling at the end of the spring. So, and for children who have disabilities in particular, these kinds of interruptions in schooling affect them more than others. And so we want to make sure we have a clear sense from the beginning of where they are and how they're doing. And then who should be assessed? So here's a question, and please answer, put your answer in the chat box. So who should be assessed? Everyone in your class, everyone? Only kids that struggle? Or just the few kids that you think are new, or the new kids, let me put it that way. Everyone, new kids, kids that struggle. Write your answer in the chat box.
If you can't see the chat box, if you just take your cursor and click on the screen, down at the bottom, there's a little tiny icon that says chat.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so you guys all came up with the correct answer, everyone, but you also pointed out some very things that are particular to this time, right? If you're teaching at distance, it's very hard to do even really good assessment unless they're doing it on a computer and you're just getting the results, right? But it's very difficult to do any kind of face-to-face. And the other thing that you mentioned is that, there's a lot of anxiety, right, for a lot of kids. And so the assessment might not be a true representation of who they are, of where they're at right now or what they know because of this situation. So what the next part is, what should we assess, right? And that's what we're mostly going to be talking about today, is what should you assess, right? We know to assess all the academic areas. For kids that are second language, we know to assess language. And for kids who, who might have behavioral, or as somebody pointed out, anxiety, we might want to do some emotional kinds of assessment. So there's a lot to assess, but let's see, there we go. So let's talk about different types of knowledge, right? Because this is true for kids, but it's also true for us as teachers. Okay, so the first kind of knowledge that we know we can talk about is declarative. So this is knowledge of facts or concepts. It's a piece of information that can be learned through memorization, right? That's what it is when we're talking about student knowledge. But when it comes to us in assessment, is what do you know about the student, right? And so when we say this, when we ask this question about students, what do you know? It's like, what do we really know, right? Not what do I think, what do I intuit, but what do I have data on, right? What are some facts? What is the information that I can really say, this is what I know about the student, right? And for a lot of you, I know for me, when I was still a classroom teacher, we'd have these student success meetings and teachers would come and present cases about their kids to, you know, to see if they might need to be referred for special education. And a lot of times it would be things like, you know, a first grade boy that can't stay still, right? Or, you know, a kid that keeps dropping their pencil, right? Or somebody that never answers questions. Well, those are good anecdotes, but they're not really the kind of information that can help you make decisions about kids, right? So we want to be able to collect information systematically so that we can make good decisions and determine what students need. The next part is procedural knowledge, and this is knowledge of how to do something, right? And so for us, it's like, how do we develop a system for tracking student progress, right? And really getting to that declarative knowledge of what do we know about these kids? And so how do you know it, right? This is what we know. How do you know it? What is the data that you have? And then finally, conditional knowledge is knowledge of when to use a specific skill or strategy, right? So how many of you, again, put your answer in the chat. How many of you have a system in place for tracking student data across time? Okay, I see one hand raised. I can't see all the hands, so if you could enter it into the chat. Well, or here, maybe I'll just try to scroll through. Keep your hands up because I have to scroll through about five, a couple of people, couple more. Okay, so a few of you. Oh, okay, Matt, Wida, okay, and DRA. Okay. So anything else that you use? No, okay. So those are great academic kinds of measures to have, and they're definitely helpful, right? And so, but we want you to think a little bit broader than that, right? And this is especially, I mean, for kids that you think might have difficulty and those that might not. So here is a list of a lot of areas that you might be able to assess, right? So these are areas to assess and observe. So we have achievement, ability, memory, language competence, visual motor integration and visual spatial reasoning, processing production speed, knowledge of reading precursors, behavior like attention, impulsivity, persistence, motivation, and anxiety. So it's been a long time since we were all together, and these are some of the terms that we talked about in some of the sessions that you guys had back a year and a half ago in Warsaw. So let's kind of go through these and like, let's have a little discussion about what some of these things are and how you might be able to measure them if you can remember from way back when, right? So let's start with achievement because that's pretty straightforward. What are some measures of achievement? And just kind of speak out because again, I can't see everybody at once. So or raise your hand, but I still can't see everybody. So measures of achievement.
We use standards-based assessment in grades 9 and 10 social studies. So we're looking at their understanding of content, their communication of their ideas over the year.
Okay. Anybody else? So you guys use MAP, right? And you assess reading, math, what else? Anything else? How about memory? Does anybody assess memory? Okay, the Woodcock-Johnson.
We also occasionally use Wyatt, not for all kids, but for kids if we're worried that they're having trouble.
Okay. Anybody else use other kinds of standardized measures of IQ, achievement?
Sylvia, to add on the gifted side, our practice for probably the last 20 years has been to actually give them out of level achievement tests. And that tells us something about their ability as well as what they've learned beyond their grade level. That may be a little bit off topic, but pretty common.
Yeah, does anybody do that for their gifted students? Nope, okay. Visual motor integration or visual spatial reasoning. Does anybody remember what those things are from last year? I know it's been a long time. It's a lot of stuff to kind of try to pull back. So visual motor integration is just sort of like, think about the eye-hand coordination. That's probably the same, that's as, you know, it's basically the same thing, right? That's what we want to know. So kids that have trouble with visual motor integration would be some of the kids in your class, for example, and this is like an old school example, but like the kids that like would look at the board and then had to try to copy something, you know, and that kind of thing. So that would be one example of kids, right? So in visual spatial reasoning, you see that you would probably see it in the Wyatt and other assessments. That's where kids have to put like pieces together or say which of these two pieces would go together, right? So it's kind of using those skills, right? So think again, you know, kids that are like good at puzzles or have difficulty with that. So then there's processing and production speed. Does anybody remember what that is and how that's related to some of the academic areas we talked about? Nope, no hands. Let me go through the whole list. Right, so processing and production speed, you might remember from, you know, our last meeting had to do with, you know, remember we talked about speed of processing, right? So how fast kids can pull information, right? Or how fast they can produce something. So if we think again about kids that are having difficulty or some of the tasks, I mean, again, so very simple things for young kids in early grades, you know, would be like being able to name a letter when they see it or say a word when they see it, right? So how fast do they kind of engage those things? In math, it's everything from, you know, doing addition, computation, multiplication, all of those things, right? How fast they process information that comes in. But then with older kids, it has to do with reading comprehension, right? Like as they're reading, are they able to organize that information to use it later, right? And so all of those things come in there. Knowledge of reading precursors, phonological awareness is one of them, right? So do they know the spoken sounds? And then behavior. And behavior is another big one because, you know, there's this relationship between behavior and academics, right? And so how many of you have ever had a child that can't read, and so they're always acting out so that they don't have to read, right? That's very common, right? But it can also be the other way, that kids actually have, you know, attention or impulsivity problems, and so they can't attend long enough. You know, that relationship, a lot of times those two things go together. And attention, impulsivity, you know, motivation, anxiety, those things are harder to assess, and it's also really hard to think about them as part of a diagnosis, right? Because a lot of times when we see those kinds of behaviors, we tend to categorize them as misbehavior, right? Not as, you know, information that we need to make good decisions about kids learning. So what I would like for you to do now, I know I just listed, is, first of all, let me ask this question. Is there anything here, any of these categories that you would like me to say more about, or do you have any questions or comments about any of those?
I'm not exactly sure how you would assess the difference between achievement and ability. I don't know if you could talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. Well, ability is more what you're able. I mean, both of them are what you're able to do. But achievement is more related to like standardized outcomes that you want for a specific grade, right? To where ability is more a description of what skills you do or do not have, right? Okay. Yeah. Let me look at the chat and see. I saw, oh, sorry, this. So any other questions? Sorry, I have to scroll in a certain way for everything. There we go. Right, so these are not tests that you would necessarily carry out, but there's things that you can do about. And again, when we have the conference, hopefully in March, when we have the all day because there are some things that you can start doing. Okay, so Jennifer, you said, I see this in students getting started on a task, how to break down a question, assess their access or prior knowledge. What do you see when they're getting started on a task? Which one are you talking about?
I was thinking about processing and production speed. Like some students really struggle with, how do I get started? You know, you may use graphic organizers, but they still need kind of that talking through of, how do I approach this, to sort of remind them of what they know and find a way to record things so they can write an essay, for example, in grade 10.
Yeah, okay, right. And so that's exactly what some of the things are, right? So the purpose of this is, and you guys are right, a lot of these things, or some of these things, when you are looking for kids to be referred in their initial assessment, they would be done by a psychologist and somebody else. But there are things that you as a teacher can observe, you know, data that you can collect, like the example Jennifer just gave us. You know, this student, you know, has a hard time getting started with work, for example. Or some students have a hard time shifting, right? Like time is over, but they're in the middle of something and they're so engrossed that it takes time for them, right? So those are the kids that you have to start giving them, you know, we're going to shift, you know, tasks in 5 minutes. We're going to shift in 3 minutes. We're going to shift in 1 minute, right? Those kinds of things. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about here. So that's one part of it, sort of the pre-referral part. But there's also the part that comes after you have students that are identified, right? Because we want to know two things. One is, are they making progress? And the second thing is, are they making progress in specific things, or is what we're doing helping them, right? Is this intervention appropriate for what they need? Is it helping, you know, is the work that we're doing, for example, on impulsivity, helping them better attend so that their academic work improves, right? And so that's sort of the two sides of what we're getting at with, you know, helping you become better observers of children, right? And so those are a couple of things. So what I would like for you guys to do now is to just take, let's say 10 minutes, and Belinda is going to put you in groups. And then in your breakout groups, like just think about these areas that we talked about. You know what you already observe. So think about the ones, or assess, think about the ones you don't currently assess, and just think about what you might be able to do to get at. So for example, you know, what might you be able to observe or do to get at visual motor integration, or processing and production speed, or any of the behavior areas. Okay, is that clear?
This is a school that I recently worked with, and wow, they did such a nice job. They had their teams brainstorm why scores in certain areas were lower. So like they looked at the support areas that were low, and then together they came up with systems. And basically they use the data team cycle. If you're not familiar with that, these are all the processes, and I'll gladly share it, like I said. But what they did was some real specifics, which I thought was great. Like the middle one, you know, what's your action plan strategy to address this learning need? And the 5th grade team actually said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to integrate expository writing into all the other subjects, such as science and social studies. We want them to gain practice identifying supporting details in the text through color coding. You know, so they were very specific. And then what they were telling me is they took this information and they did it for a month, and then they came back after a month and talked about it and said, you know, how are we doing? And made new goals. And they found that to be really, really valuable. And one of the things I asked them is, how is that different than working in a PLC, you know, a professional learning group? And one of the things they talked about is that they felt the difference was that the accountability was fierce compared to just a PLC where you're chatting and sharing information. I mean, they were really accountable to each other. Like they had to go do it and come back and be like, okay, here's my samples. And they brought actual samples. And this was a team that did this on their own. And then they started sharing it with the school. And gradually now almost all the teams in the school are using it. So that's actually what makes me ask about teamwork, because just having recently seen the value of schools that can really produce well on a team situation, especially since some of you are coordinating, you know, that's a chance for you to get in there too and provide them some real hands-on support. Yeah.
So Belinda, do you understand correctly that they completely moved from PLC and started working with the teams more?
They did. They moved away from PLCs. Yeah. They were floundering. They felt like the PLC wasn't really working for them. You know, they'd been using PLCs for like 3 years, and they found like they were just not getting anywhere with it. And so they went to data teams, and they called it that. Like this group, this 5th grade started, they called it a data team. And now everybody, all the grade levels have said, we're data teams. And it just made so much sense for them, because every time they got together, they were looking at data. And so, of course, when you start looking at data, then you start talking assessment, then you reach out and you think about, you know, your low performers, your high performers. They found that they weren't floundering anymore in their discussions with PLCs. Yeah. So not to put
Yeah, that makes a
PLCs
lot
down,
of
because I
sense
think there's
because-
value of PLCs when you're doing things like a book study, or you're looking at how to teach reading, for example. You know, like if you were talking as a team about how you use comprehension or fluency or phonological awareness, or, you know, those kind of things, I think works really well for PLC. But if you don't have a focus, it's tough. Yeah. Any other experiences that you can think about related to assessment that have been really beneficial for you?
Well, last year I was in EYP, but we were not, well, we're half year in person and half year online.
Okay.
And when we were online, I think assessment piece, and it was just agreement of the school, we are not assessing. We're just trying to support and giving kids as much as we can, and we'll assess, and that's what we're trying to do right now, to assess. But while we move on and continue teaching, we kind of trying to fill up those gaps if we see them. But last year, so EYP, the way it was, it's kind of like pre-K, 4 and 5 year olds. What I found really interesting, because it was my first year at this school, we have 3 classes in the same room and 3 teachers, and it's play-based, and 3 teachers doing different things. So we're calling kids in, we had 40 kids around, and we were assessing different things. We agreed, so one is assessing social emotional, another is language, and third is math. And then in 3 months, we rotated.
Nice.
And that way we had, so everyone had the chance to interact with each child on a certain level, to see their perspective on each of these aspects, which give a really good results at the end. And I found it really, really, really helpful.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great idea. I like the idea too of rotating, because what I might see for social emotional, you might pick up something that I didn't see, you know, that next month. Yeah. So
Yeah.
moving around, that's such a clever idea. Definitely.
Yeah, and sometimes, like for me, social emotional was really hard at the beginning because I was the first one. But then with the time, I realized when they started assessing it, I was like, oh, okay, that's how it is. But I just realized, okay, I was okay, because it's so hard. It's a lot of bias in it, right? Bias. You are being biased because you are measuring from your point of view. So it's always good to see others people perspective. And then when we report to parents, it's already solid.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was so nice to have this time with you guys. I really appreciate it.
It's smoky where I'm at. I'm at the Los Angeles Bobcat fire.
Yeah, it's smoky here too, but we had rain tonight, so hopefully tomorrow it'll be better.
Yeah, we're hoping for rain too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was able to join a couple of groups. So I'm going to ask one person from each group to maybe say 1 or 2 things about what they discussed in their group, and then we'll move on. Who would like to go first? I might have to start calling on names. Oh, okay, Elizabeth, sorry. I didn't
No,
see
that's
your hands.
okay. No, so we just kind of were talking about the list that you had placed up there, the framework of the different areas for assessment. And we just talked about different protocols that we use in our schools. But one of the things that we discussed that and we wanted to bring this to the group as a whole, is the idea of maybe creating a, using the framework that you provided in the slide that you shared, but filling that out with maybe informal assessments or formal assessments that we could all add to, you know, like creating some kind of a document where we sort of flesh out that framework. Is a document like that, or if that's what we want to create, because I just thought maybe it might be useful for all of us, you know, if we're recommending programs or testing batteries, or we want to go to our administrators or headquarters and try to convince them to invest in something, it might be nice to have, you know, a battery of resources.
Yeah, when in our bigger presentation that Susan and I were going to do, and we'll still do this year, we do have lists of specific assessments for different purposes. But if you guys think that you might want to get some sooner, we could definitely put a list together and send it to you guys.
We could even maybe collaborate as a group as well. I mean, you know, start like a document of sorts.
Like a Google Doc?
Something like that, where we can add.
I think that's a great idea. I think, I mean, because for example, me personally, I would like to look at it in advance, even before our next session will start. So I'm very interested into it.
Okay.
If you guys, we could add a little link on the Google Doc that you're filling out for tonight. We could just add a link of like what types of assessments you use, and you can just start dropping them in. That would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Helene, I just sent you the link to the Google Drive, so that we could post it on the group chat.
Okay. Another group? I'm going to kind of go like this on my screen, and wherever my my pencil ends up, that's who's going to go next. Yeah, so Jennifer, what does this look like for different ages? That's exactly what the big all-day presentation was going to be about, right? Like actually have case studies and, you know, and have you guys work through case studies and actually look at descriptions of kids across the age span. And so what a disability looks like in, you know, the early grades, the middle grades, high school. So that's definitely that we'll have more time. Like I said at the beginning, this is more a preview to get you started. So really to get you to start thinking about, in addition to what assessments you already collect, what other kind of information, you know, you can observe, not necessarily administer more assessments, but, you know, how do you begin to become good observers of children's behavior? So
yeah, we talked about that a little in our group. We were discussing things like trying to parse the difference between a language competence issue and kind of some other underlying processing issue, and how that is very challenging. And often we just kind of have to keep building and working and getting to know the child better over time. We also talked about some of the specific challenges of distance learning, like for kids who have visual and spatial reasoning challenges, reading on the screen can be a really tough thing.
Yes.
So now that I'm fortunate to be in class with my students, although we're all wearing masks, the idea of like, okay, who wants a printed copy, right? Because for some kids, being able to follow along, to highlight things is just a much better way for them to monitor. And we did also talk about how in upper school, like students are using a variety of coping strategies because they're not new to this education game. So they know already, like, how do I cover up for the fact that I have a poor memory? You know, they may not know exactly what their challenge is, but they found ways to cope. And so observation is really important to kind of uncover those layers and identify what their real challenge is.
Good, thank you. Anybody
Sylvia,
else?
I can add from group 5. we talked a little bit about, we talked about observing students and especially, along that same line as Jennifer about the online distance learning, being able to find measures because we don't think that distance learning is going anywhere too far from us anytime soon. But really how to kind of, gain further insight when you're sitting across a computer screen from a student and, partnering with parents and what that would look like. And then also another point that was brought up and discussed that was really important was just as we, ourselves observe student behavior and take note and have these sort of formative assessments within a classroom, how do we, make sure that we track that and transfer that to other teachers and to other members of the school community so that the information is not just staying with us, but is able to be used by everybody who supports that child in a meaningful way. So those were a couple points that really took us, along a while to discuss through and what that looks like at each of our schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea would be that hopefully you would, at some point have a system for sharing that kind in an easy way, right? Because I think that that's one of the big challenges with data collection of any kind, right? Whether it's assessment or observation, is that, you either end up with a bunch of stuff that you don't know what to do with, or, it stays with the person that collects it and it doesn't get shared with everybody that needs to be. So a kind of school-wide approach to these kinds of issues would be really helpful, not only for the student, but, for the teachers as well. And the other part is part of good assessment is that it's easy to get and easy to do something with, right? Because again, you don't want to have so much data that it take, 2 months later, you're just trying to compile it all and figure out what the issue is, right? So you want to be able to have quick turnaround as well. So those are definitely important, and the whole issue of like getting to know the child, right? I mean, the one benefit of sort of systematically collecting data is that it's easier to track changes in the student, either positive or negative, right? Is the behavior increasing or is it decreasing? What did I do, right? So in terms, Galina, you guys talked about, in your group, you guys had talked about, being able to change the intervention, right? So you have to, those observations can help you. If you pair, here's the child behavior, here's what I'm doing, the behavior that I want increases or, stays the same or decreases, that tells you like, oh, it's working. I'm not getting progress, but it's not getting worse, or it's getting worse, so I need to change something, right? So you want it to have that formative role of helping you think about what to do instructionally as well.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
To teach them individually, it's never a problem. It's just like to collaborate with a homeroom teacher and to figure out the strategy how to work with a child in a group in the class. And this is our main issue. And then we always have an academic success if we are able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Any other group that would like to share? No. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation and the next so again, here's just some questions about observing behaviors, some questions to ask. And some of you said that you had some forms already that you're using that, what does the student struggle with? And again, it could be academic, or it could be, one of the executive functioning processes that we had talked about, and I think this is the hardest one sometimes to pinpoint. How does the student's weakness impact classroom performance? right? So that, because this is where you have to sort of make that connection between the behavior you're observing and what kind of work you're getting, right? So I'm going to keep going back to Jennifer's example, the student that has this hard time getting started. You know, that behavior, what you're going to definitely see is incomplete work, you know, work that doesn't get turned in. You know, those might be some examples, right? Another example might be a student that, you know, has trouble with attention, right? So that maybe they don't get everything they're supposed to do. And so their assignments are sort of half finished or half correct because they didn't get everything that they were supposed to do. But equally important is, what are students' strengths, right? We want to know what they're good at. Why is that important? You can just speak out if you want to answer.
It's important for a lot of reasons, for making sure that they know they do have strengths, because other people might focus on the weaknesses that they have and what they can't do. So, and also to strategize, like, how can we work around the challenge that you're having by playing upon those strengths.
Yep, exactly. The next one is also important. What does the student need most to work on, right? And because we know that there's going to be students that have challenges in a lot of areas, but there might be like a pivot point, right? If we work on one thing, that's going to take care of a couple of other things. So really getting to understand what those things might, what those things might be is important to figure out as well. Then what services have been or need to be provided, and then what modifications or accommodations have been or need to be made. So again, really just thinking about, you know, all of these things, and then, you know, in that, what does the student struggle with? You know, the weaknesses, the strength, those are things that we would want to collect systematically and over time. Any questions or comments about this? Okay, I can't see everybody's hand, so just speak up if you want to. If not, I'll go on.
Yeah, I think it would be great if, and I may not be saying your name correctly, Lama, if you shared your example of your young children and how you guys did the team assessment. I think it'd be nice for everybody to hear that.
We started the Discover Learning last year and early years, and what we were doing is on a weekly basis, we had 3 or 4 focused children. So we would, they'll be our main focus to observe. And we'd observe them socially, physically, and in class, and while they're in Discover Learning. So it really gave us a chance to focus on each and every child individually. And after the assessment, we would meet with the parents and discuss any issues or things that we would like them to work on, so that we would be working hand in hand together.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any examples to share?
Sylvia, a little bit ago, there was something in the chat of people saying how a lot of their assessments were done by professionals like out of country. And I think one of the main things we want to hit hard here is that you guys have tools where you are the ones boots on the ground with the students, that you can do these formative assessments, and there's a lot of value to them, especially in observing.
Right, exactly. And again, that's sort of the purpose, you know, of this, is to get get you to think about that role and, you know, how you might, you know, the value added of that kind, those kinds of observations. Okay, so in terms of the procedures, and again, some of you said that you already have these, and I know you have them for, again, a lot of academic achievement areas, you know, a systematic data collection, you know, also for language, to know if kids' language is improving, English proficiency, and then a recording process. And so I think the recording process, again, might be sort of can be, I should say, the most challenging, right? Because it's that idea of parsing out what you have so that you sort of distill it to the most important information that's going to help you make decisions. And then the interpretation, related to that is the interpretation of data, right? So working together as teams. You know, I know in secondary, probably middle school, you work a lot in teams because these students are with different teachers and you want to see what's happening across the different classrooms. But then, you know, here is a lot of the EAL stuff in the interpretation of the data, you know, is what we're seeing because of language? Is it because of behavior? Is it because of a learning disability, right? So looking across your data, to help you make those decisions. And then finally, the implementation of some kind of intervention for that student. Even before, I would say I mean, even if you do refer them, right, especially as some of you mentioned, they might have to go to another country. So there might be a delay from the time that you guys collect this data and before you could get a formal referral and evaluation. So what do you do in the meantime to help this student? So any questions, comments, or concerns? We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay. May I just say a comment?
Sure.
All right, just a comment that I have been thinking a lot about our session, and this is my opinion how the kind of like the future of the education will look like. It's like gathering the data, which we do, that's like, it's gathered by many specialists, but also I was thinking, Sylvia, how we were talking about in my team about like teaching students through their strength. And this is not what's always happening, like kind of like figure out the individual way of how to give them an opportunity to express themselves. And that's not what's happening most of the time, because usually they are asked by the curriculum to present it through the presentation. It needs to be done like this or like that, and not everybody has its strengths. So I think gathering data, then teaching students through their strengths, which I do have this opportunity because I work individually mostly, and collaboration, working everybody as a team. So I find that data is not always a problem, but the thing is teaching through strengths and collaboration in the future, and cooperation. That's two main things that need to be kind of, we are getting in there, maybe not as fast as we want to. It's just my calculations about the process, but we are getting there.
Well, you know, that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because maybe it'll give me a chance to maybe make a point more clearly. You know, I think a lot of times, and maybe as soon as you started talking, I felt guilty of this in this presentation.
No, that's what I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think part of why that happens is because when we start thinking about assessment, and especially these observations, we look for the gaps, right? For what is not happening instead of what is, right? So maybe when we're thinking about, you know, those observations that we're doing, it shouldn't always be what's missing, but what are the strengths, right? So again, so when we think about those observation questions, that's why that's in there, right? So we want to know what they do well so that we can teach through that, or, you know, uh, uh, capitalize on those skills and those strengths, and also what's missing, right? Because sometimes it's that combination. For some kids, looking at the combination of strengths and needs is going to really help us pinpoint what they need. So thank you for bringing that point up so that we can make, like, you know, kind of emphasize that point of looking at both things. Anybody else?
Sylvia, can I just make a point about that? I don't know if you can hear me, but you know, in terms of when the kids go to specialist classes, you know, they might do really well, for instance, in say music, but then in the homeroom or the classroom, they really struggle in that environment, or they excel in art class, but then they really struggle with the environment of the homeroom class. So I think in that sense, collaborating with specialist teachers is so important in finding out the whole picture, because, you know, as the homeroom teacher, you don't see your students and how they behave in other specialist classes.
Right, that's an excellent point. And it also brings up another important point, that in our observations and in our data gathering, you know, again, we tend to focus on the child, but the environment is equally important, right? So if you're seeing these discrepancies in behavior, or, you know, how well the child is doing, it might be about the environment. So noticing the differences in those environments might help you understand what is helping the student do well or not, you know, or what's hindering their ability to do well. So that's another excellent point. So it's observation of the child is definitely the primary focus, but we can't forget the environment in which, you know, we expect them to work as well. Thank you. That was another great point. Anybody else?
I was just going to add my and our concern where we are now. I think you can hear me. As we're back, our kids are back in class and bubbles and wearing masks, etc. But I think what will happen soon is I think eventually, it's not when, it'll be if it'll be when we go back into lockdown again and our kids go back online and are at home. So those vulnerable kids are there, and especially if they haven't got that support at home from a family, they're at home. Some of them are just at sea with being able to cope with academics and technology. So it's those kids that are at home, that we can't see them, we can't do the, you know, we're talking about data collection and recording, we're talking about those things which are really good face-to-face and can be done online, but it's such a challenge for the kids who have additional needs and challenges.
Yeah, I agree. And so maybe, you know, again, because as somebody pointed out, this is not likely to go away anytime soon, you know, maybe thinking about ways to have parents or whoever is going to be in the home supporting the child, giving them, you know, thinking with them about some strategies to support that child, you know, because engagement and motivation are such big pieces of this, right? And you're right, it's one thing when they're right there in the room with you and you can like come up next to them, you know, and things like that, but across the screen, it becomes more challenging. So, you know, maybe thinking about ways that somebody else could provide that proximity to help will become important.
I think it's also important to pick your tools that you're using. In our breakout room, we talked a little bit about that, and I have a couple of slides that I was going to send out to my breakout room. I'll gladly share with everybody, that has some examples of different tools that you can use that are, you know, we have to think about, our kids are used to doing social media and they're used to doing games online. So are there things that are similar for them that will hook them, that are academic and very simple? And there's some pretty good tools out there for those kinds of things. So I'll share what I have. And if you guys have individual questions, you're welcome to email me, and I could even get a one-on-one on with you and show you how to use some of it. but even the simplest, like we were talking in our group about a teacher I just recently saw who's doing an online assessment of kindergarten, and it's just a matter of moving the color to match the color, you know, so that the teacher can see it. Just using a pear deck is what she was using for that. But there's just different tools that we can use that are so beneficial. Absolutely.
Okay. So here's a couple of things for you guys to work on between now and the conference in March, which we hopefully will have in person. So what are 3 things that you as a school can do to become better observers of behavior, right? And there was, you guys had some discussion in your groups. A couple of people gave examples. And then what are 2 things that you can do as a teacher to become a better observer of behavior? So again, those are a couple of things that you can do. You know, we'll get the Google Doc going so that you guys can start collecting some.
It's already been set up and sent to them.
Okay, great. So we have, I think, about 2 minutes. So any last minute questions or comments?
Can I jump in and ask a question about next time? I put a little note there about marking your calendars for October 23rd. We're curious about the time. Is this time in the morning best for you? Or another option would be like 7 hours later. So it would be more toward the end of your days. What is your preference? Do you like the morning? You want to keep morning, or would you prefer after school?
Morning is better, I guess. It's
Morning
my
is-
opinion. Just to my opinion.
There is, at the bottom, there's a little thing that says reaction. If you click on that, you can give me a thumbs up if you prefer morning. I'd like to see, I have the screen with everybody open right now. I just want to see where we're at.
Yeah, the chat is looking like morning too.
Okay. That helps us. So we will keep this same time on October 23rd. And just so you know, the presenter for October 23rd is going to hit pretty hard some behavior issues, some coping with like anxiety and some of that stuff for online learning. He's going to do a nice job in that regard. I also had several private chats today asking for the PowerPoint ahead of time. I will ask him if he's willing to share it ahead of time, so you'll have something to take notes on. And then Dr. Thomas, are you willing to share your PowerPoint this evening?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, so we'll get that and we'll send it out, or maybe you could just pick up the and drop it into the calendar invite, or the send it to Helena, and she can send it out, or send it to me and I can send it out through the group chat. So that way we can make sure we're getting, and we also have our Google Drive from last summer. So when I get this PowerPoint, I will drop it in there as well. And I'll put the information from my small group in there as well. So just want to keep sharing. And now that we're back in session, we want to keep meeting with you to make these connections before March. Yeah.
Okay, well, it was great seeing everyone. Like I said, it's been a long time and it's good to see you again. Hopefully we'll get to see you guys in March in person. And if not, well, it'll be in whatever way we can get it done. It'll probably be on Zoom again if the conference is canceled. Any last questions or comments?
Congratulations, Christy. Your baby looks adorable.
Yeah. Such a good baby, not a peep the whole time.
Yeah. Oh, I put us on mute when he was making noise.
Oh.
We all feel like part of your extended family.
Okay, well, have a great rest of your day and hope to see you all again soon. Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.